Welcome friends, welcome back to the kitchen, welcome back to Sunday morning and the Old Cookbook Show. Today we're going to do a recipe out of this cookbook, published in 1777. This is a second edition of a cookbook simply called Cookery and Pastry, as taught and practiced by Mrs Maciver, teacher of those arts in Edinburgh. So Mrs Maciver ran a cooking school in Edinburgh, and she had several editions of this cookbook. And I know that one of the later editions you can buy a reproduction from the Townsend's store, and they've done recipes from this book in the past. Now, Mrs Maciver ran this cooking school, and you're going to see this other little cookbook that we've used in the past, almost identical, same size, a lot of the same recipes. This one was written by Mrs Fraser. Now, Mrs Fraser had been a student at Mrs Maciver's school, and then when Mrs Maciver passed on, Mrs Fraser took over and continued the work. And you'll see a lot of commonality in the recipes. Today, we're going to do one called a carrot pudding, and I have to be very careful with my book. It's starting to come apart. It needs to be rebound. So I'll probably refer to the recipe on my iPad where I have written it out. In this pot, I'm going to start out by cooking the carrots. We need to boil them until they're soft. She wants us to mash them in a mortar and pestle. I may cheat a little bit on that count. Next, we need to deal with the eggs. It calls for 10 eggs, but I leave 5 whites out. So 5 whole eggs and then 5 egg yolks. Now, there's always a lot of discussion in the comments section below these videos, especially the ones from the Old Cookbook Show, about egg size. The general feeling amongst commenters seems to be that eggs in the past were much smaller, with a lot of people even saying that eggs were half the size in the olden times. And the research that I've done and the people that I've talked to doesn't really seem to bear that out. There's no empirical evidence that eggs were smaller. There's a lot of discussion amongst historians about egg size, and pretty much the only references that we can find to egg size was that in this time period, 1700s, even back as far as the 1600s, there were calls for grading and sizing of eggs so that shopkeepers got paid for what they were selling, or that buyers, homeowners, cooks, were paying for what they were getting. Some homeowners thought, or some cooks thought, that they were getting ripped off because they would get a basket just of small eggs, or a basket that was heavily mixed towards smaller eggs or towards larger eggs. So the only thing that seems to stand true is that egg size varies wildly over time, and that it's tied more to the variety of chicken that's laying the egg. I need to do a lot more research on that, but it doesn't seem to be that you could say in a wide open, far-ranging statement that eggs were smaller in olden times. Doesn't seem to bear out. So that's the last egg. The next thing I need to do is add some sugar. And it says to beat all well together, and I'm going to use an electric mixer. I'm going to cheat. Now, the recipe gives me options for flavoring this pudding. Either beet cinnamon or ground cinnamon, or an orange if you have it. Now, both the orange and the cinnamon would have been imported. Both would have been probably equally difficult or expensive to get. I have an orange, so I'm going to use orange because I really like the way oranges and carrots go together. Cinnamon and carrots go together really well too, but let's go with orange today. And which leads me to, one of the topics of discussion whenever I do Scottish recipes. There's this popular concept that Scotland was this poor, backwards country where people, led this hardscrabble lifestyle just with what they could grow, on some rocky soil in the wind-swept northern coast. Partly true. Definitely partly true. That would be some people's experience. But there was a thriving upper middle class in Scotland. There was a thriving merchant class in Scotland. And Mrs Maciver really positions herself to sell her recipes in her cooking school to that class of people. So the recipes that you see in her books use a lot of imported and relatively expensive ingredients to suit those people. Okay, I'm going to say those are done. So we'll drain them out. Okay, now the instruction is to beat them fine in a mortar. It's 2021. I have a stick blender. I'm pretty sure Mrs Maciver would use a stick blender. I'm also supposed to add two or three spoonfuls of sweet cream. And it doesn't really say what size that spoonful should be. And there's kind of a discussion as to whether it's a serving spoon or a tablespoon, which would have, in this time period, a tablespoon actually would have been a serving spoon size, not the size that we now think of as a tablespoon. So I'm gonna eyeball it. I really don't know how much to put in. The reality is this is kind of a mix between a souffle and a custard. So let's call that 2 or 3 spoonfuls, and I'll continue mashing. Looking good. Okay, so carrot mixture goes in. Carrot mixture looks really good. I think I could probably just eat that without putting it into anything else. I know it looks a little bit like baby food. Carrots and cream, they go really well together. So that goes in, and I'm going to continue mixing it, beating it together. The last thing I'm supposed to add in is 8 ounces of oiled butter. And I take 8 ounces of oiled butter to mean butter that has been melted. There is an argument to be made that oiled butter could mean clarified butter. And certainly there was a huge French influence on Scottish cooking in this time period. So, or in the time period earlier than this even. So it could be melted clarified butter. I'm going to go with melted whole butter and see how that works out. But 8 ounces of melted butter is a lot of butter. Okay. Now, there's no temperature to bake this at. It doesn't even tell you hot or cold oven. It just says to bake it. And a lot of people question baking a pudding because really puddings in this time period were mostly boiled or steamed. But this sort of is a transition into what pudding actually means. And the other thing is, temperature still wasn't a thing. Temperature had been invented. Well, no, so let me backtrack that a little. People always knew whether it was hot or cold. But a measurement system for temperature wasn't commonplace until the sort of middle 1700s when Fahrenheit and Celsius were codified. And by this point in 1777, thermometers were a thing for sure, but I don't know that many households had their own thermometer. And a lot of cooks wouldn't be using thermometers in their kitchen because they'd be too fragile, too expensive. So I'm just going to pop this in a 350-degree oven, watch it closely, and see what happens. And I've put a baking tray in the oven in case it bubbles over. Who knows what's going to happen? There we go. Hey, Jules.
Hi, Glen. Hey, friends.
So, a carrot pudding.
That would explain the orange color. Mm-hmm. It looks like a cake, though, but not cake. It's not like it's not.
It's yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of a cross between a custard and a souffle, and
I can see the carroty color and the. That's really light and refreshing.
I like that.
Apparently, Glen really likes that.
I like that.
A little honey drizzle would go really nicely with that. Mm-hmm. Glen's had 2 pieces already. Oh my goodness, Glen. That's a really lovely, and that is, I can imagine it being chilled in the summer with some mint leaves or something.
Yeah. Yes. So it gave me 2 options for flavoring. One was cinnamon and one was orange. And I think the orange works really well with that. Any citrus, I think, would work with that. The carrot, completely lost.
It probably brings something, like it probably brings a sweetness to it.
Yeah.
And
There might
the
be
fibers
an
that
earthy
hold, kind of,
tone
and
to hold it together.
that hold it together part of it. I mean, you can try it without it.
Yeah, no, that's good. I
But
really like that.
I think the carrots also takes it from being a custard texture to being a cakey texture.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, clearly that's a winner.
So, Mrs Maciver's a carrot pudding from 1777. I'd say that's a winner. Thanks for stopping by. See you again soon.